Okay, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for joining me. In what part are we in now? Is this part three, part four? I'll figure it out in post. Okay, but I do know that we are continuing with this Go show on the object of devotion for observing the mind established in the fifth 500-year period after the thus come once passing. So far in this Go show, we've spent a lot of time talking about the 3,000 realms known by, I should say, the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. And that's important because this is a discussion of the process of instantiation, the process of nidana, the process of how we come to be self-aware, thinking, uh, ego-driven, attached, mentally beings. But it starts from the very uh, subatomic pre-universe area that we nowadays assign strictly to cosmologists and particle physicists and quantum theorists and so on. But Shakyamuni was talking about this as those before him had tried to understand the cosmos and our human place in it. It's just that uh, Buddha's awakening, Shakyamuni's awakening, his understanding of Buddha perception, the Buddha eye, the Buddha wisdom, the Buddha awakening from his position as a human could understand clearly how this whole consciousness thing comes about. And as you'll see as we continue here with this next question, um, and you understand once again this Q&A format is a way for Nichiren, as other scholars, bodhisattvas, have written, that captures a large contingency of his students' difficulties in a clear way, albeit 13th century still. Um, he was dealing as somebody, as a teacher of the Lotus Sutra, and by inclusion, all of Buddhist scholarship culminating in the Lotus. He was living at a time when there were several other sects who challenged his understanding of the Lotus Sutra, his understanding, in fact, of the entirety of Buddhist scholarship. And so their voices were loud and omnipresent and caused him, as we've already talked about, and you can read about, great persecutions to try to get him out of the way. Not unlike Shakyamuni and others before Nichiren, who had raised the ire of those who would use the teachings of Buddhism in a political way, in a way to advantage them with the forces of governance. And you have to understand, in those days, as we are threatened again these days, a strong authoritarianship was the mode of the day, right? I mean, to the point of emperors and kings running things. Okay, so Nichiren was living at a time, again, transitioning to the shogunate, but no less a power elite. Um, so the very idea that your highest potential, your Buddha nature, your availability to um, quiescence, the highest state of living this life, was available to you and everyone you know, flew greatly in the face of power that wants to believe that, like emperors and kings, those people are special, that they're the ones imbued with the way to achieve this maximal potential, that you, the serf, the merchant, the mere peasant, the mere whatever, no matter what stage you are beneath that leadership, that try as you might, that's simply not available to you. You don't have the right blood, the right lineage, the right whatever. So this teaching, very, very, not only controversial, but problematic culturally. So once again, we're going to be exposed to that struggle. And it's not without its parallels today. So it has value to study. But from that point of view, I hope I prepared you to understand what we're about to dive into here. Because quite literally, we're dealing with the doubt in people's minds that, okay, all this Buddhism is well and good, and I can live a good life, and it has all the right, tools to make me feel more confident that I'm living a good life. But Buddhahood, seriously, it, you know, he was asking, and we are asking as Buddhists, a tremendous shift in our cultures to get people to understand that we're all not going to a promised land, that this enlightenment isn't some other zone of a life that we'll never experience, that life is for suffering, to speak like a Catholic for a minute. All life is suffering, as the Buddha himself stated, right, as Shakyamuni stated, all life is suffering. And the only escape is that, on balance, if the judge at the end of your life says, okay, we'll let your suffering, we'll let your whatever defilements stand, or whatever, we'll let it go, and you can come into the good place. Or there's too much crap in your life, you're going to hell, right? I mean, that's in every culture, and certainly inculcated strongly from birth, from our culture's reliance on religions, whether it's obvious or discreet. That's the training. And certainly was in Nichiren's day, right? And so Buddhism says, yeah, okay, life is suffering, but only because you choose it to be. What? Right? Uh, no, you can be fully enlightened. You just need to retrain your cultural stigmas, your and cultural not only as a country and as a society, but as a personal culture. We each are, as the song would have us sing decades ago, dating myself here, we are all a cult of personality, right? We've all evolved our personification of an ideal that we don't even know the roots of, right? This is the study of Buddhism. It dissects that to help us, to give us tools to go, oh, I don't need to think that way. I don't need for this to be a trigger for me to go down this path. Everything is triggering me. That's not really me. So who is me? Now, when you get to that point, who's talking here? Um, it can get a little scary, and it can raise doubts. It can shatter confidence. So that's what the teaching of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment is trying to open that door to understand. You've got to understand each moment, even though you're not perceiving life in those discrete moments, because you'd never be able to pay attention to anything else. There's so much going on in each moment, this transfer of energy from the last moment, which represented all of my beingness, being pushed into this next moment that I'm now experienced, that is now gone, pushing into the next moment that I'm now. But to kind of observe that mechanism, it can be overwhelming, right? So this is why the Lotus Sutra is so important, because it says if you just now use this tool to refocus your attention, your all-powerful mind, to focus it on something that transcends this interaction, even without perceiving it, without spending time on how, because that's a trap, as I have videos about, you will influence, and by influencing, you will replace certain modes of constant transmittal from one moment to the next of what clouds your understanding of what's really going on in this inertia, in this movement from moment to moment of your life. So the teaching of 3,000 Realms is really about deeper understanding, more profound understanding of how much is at play in each moment of your life, how much can then be influenced, altered, and how the avalanche of it that is moving you through life and creating your suffering. This is your access point. This is what you're influencing, shattering, redirecting in these moments that you can't perceive, but you will perceive their effect. Cause effect, right? I hate to use those terms because they're so maligned and so misused, and we hear them so often. But this is what chanting to Gohonzon is, the ultimate cause, ultimate because it transcends all of that other stuff and influences those innumerable, immeasurable forces that are transmitting from moment to moment your idea of life, of what's going on, let alone who you are, who I am. That's just like so far down the chain of events. This is why this is so important. This is why chanting Daimoku Gohonzon are so important. Because you don't have to be an elite special person with imbued insight. You can gain your own. Now you have a tool where you can gain your own direct access to it. It's inherent in you. It's just it has all this other garbage pushing it aside, coloring it, veiling it. Right? This is the study of Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism. So this Gosho is trying to deal with that in Buddhist terms. And this is where we're headed now to Buddhism, or into this Gosho. You say that we can do this, but really? That's really this next part, so pay attention, please. Here we go. Question. Shakyamuni, the Lord of Teachings, is the Buddha who has completely destroyed the three categories of illusion. Now we're going to see this I don't know if this is the translation that does this, or if this is actually what Nichiren wrote, but we're going to see this knife edge constantly, and I'm just going to say it this once, and then we're going to go, okay? But Shakyamuni is the Lord of Teaching. Shakyamuni was a person. He is the Buddha who has completely destroyed the three categories of illusion. Okay, Buddha does that. Buddha-ness. Not Buddha, a person called Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni experienced Buddhahood. And he lived in his Buddha nature. But he, Shakyamuni, didn't completely destroy the three categories of illusion. The Buddha-ness did, accessible to you and I. So right there is a linguistic device that is confusing. and is the first step toward doubt that you and I are exactly the same. Ironic, because Siddhartha's whole accomplishment of Shakyamuni, great saint of the Shakya clan, Shakyamuni, achieved his enlightenment in his human form, being the ultimate example of how Buddhahood, Buddha-ness, is accessible to anyone, and yet it's used as a contradiction. It's simply through language. Please try to keep that in mind as we read through this old translation. Completely destroyed the three categories of illusion. He is the sovereign of all rulers. There it is, he is the sovereign of all rulers, bodhisattvas, persons of the two vehicles, human and heavenly beings, and others in the 10 directions. In other words, all humans. Whenever the Buddha moves, Brahma attends him on the left and Chakra on the right. Now we're talking about deifications of human forces, the mind. Brahma attends him on the left and Chakra on the right. The 4 kinds of Buddhists and the 8 kinds of non-human beings follow behind, while the Vajra-bearing gods march in the vanguard. With his 80,000 teachings, he leads all living beings to emancipation. How could a Buddha such as this, dwell in the hearts of us ordinary people? Ta-da! There it is. He's special. He's imbued. I'm not. Right? Both the teachings before the Lotus Sutra and the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra itself tell us that Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. That's an error. But this is Nichiren talking as a questioner and including their misnomers and their honest questioning of what Nichiren is saying. So even the question here is going to be lengthy because he wants to make sure that all of these doubts are addressed. So he's going to elicit every form of them with scholarship. So he's going to form a formidable argument against himself. So he has an opportunity to respond to all of these doubts. So interesting. Let's proceed. Searching for the cause of his enlightenment, we find that he practiced bodhisattva austerities in the past existences as Prince Earnest Donor, Bodhisattva Learned Youth, King Shiva, and Prince Sattva. This previous lives thing. The Buddha practiced his austerities for 3 asamkhaya kalpas, or 100 major kalpas, or for kalpas equal in number to countless dust particles, or for countless asamkhaya kalpas, or from the time he first set his mind on enlightenment. There's a huge clue. Or for as long as major world system dust particle kalpas. He served as many as 75, 76, or 77,000 Buddhas, passed through innumerable kalpas, and, having completed his practice, became in this life Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings. Are you saying that within each of us exists the world of the Bodhisattva, which is endowed with all the blessings the Buddha attained as a result of his practice? You silly man. This guy's lived more lifetimes than any of us could even fathom by his own stories and admission, all to one day reach now who he is today. And, oh yeah, we can all do it right now. We all have this access. You're full of it. I mean, prove me wrong. It's in his own documents, right? This is an in-your-face argument using scholarship. Looking into the results of his practice, we see that Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, this is still the questioner, first attained enlightenment in this life, keeps insisting on this. For more than 40 years, the Buddha revealed himself in 4 different ways in the 4 kinds of teachings. This denies the fifth period, right? Thus, by expounding the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings, the theoretical teaching, and the Nirvana Sutra, he was able to benefit all living beings. When he preached the Lotus Treasury World in the Flower Garland Sutra, Sanskrit Avatamsaka Sutra, Japanese Kigan Sutra, Shakyamuni appeared as Vairochana Buddha seated on the lotus petals with other Buddhas surrounding him in the 10 directions. When he preached the Agama Sutras, he appeared as a Buddha who had eliminated illusions and attained the way by practicing 34 kinds of spiritual purification. When he preached the correct and equal sutras, he was accompanied by a great multitude of Buddhas. 1,000 Buddhas joined him when he preached the Wisdom Sutras. In the Mahavarachana and Diamond Crown Sutras, he made a dignified appearance as the 1,200 and more honored ones. In the Treasure Tower chapter of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha manifests himself in 4 different ways, corresponding to the 4 kinds of lands. When the Buddha preached the Nirvana Sutra, those assembled saw him variously as a Buddha 16 feet tall, as having a small or large body, as Vairochana Buddha, or as a Buddha with a body as vast as space. Thus he has manifested 4 kinds of bodies. When the Buddha passed into extinction at the age of 80, he left his relics to benefit people in the former, middle, and latter days of the law. Strong argument from other teachings, other earlier teachings and other sects, actually. Now, the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra says that Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, attained Buddhahood numberless major world system dust particle kappas ago, and that the cause that made this possible was the practice he had carried out at that time. Since then, he has manifested emanation bodies throughout the worlds of the 10 directions and preached all the sacred teachings of his lifetime to teach and convert people as numerous as the dust particles of the land. When we compare the number of disciples in the essential teaching with that of the disciples in the theoretical teaching, the former is like an ocean and the latter like a drop of water, or the one like a mountain and the other like a speck of dust. What is more, a bodhisattva of the essential teaching is far superior to any bodhisattva of the theoretical teaching, including Manjushri, perceiver of the world's sounds, or any of the others who gathered from the worlds in the 10 directions. The difference between them is even greater than that between Shakra and a monkey. Are you saying that besides these bodhisattvas, the persons of the 2 vehicles who obtained their enlightenment by destroying their illusions, Brahma, Shakra, the gods of the sun and moon, the 4 heavenly kings, the 4 wheel-turning kings, and the immense flames of the great citadel of the hell of incessant suffering, all beings and all things in the 10 directions, are inherent in the 10 worlds and in the 3,000 realms of our own lives? Even if you say that this is what the Buddha taught, I still cannot believe it. When we consider the matter in this light, we see that the sutras that came before the Lotus Sutra are genuine in both substance and wording. The Flower Garland Sutra describes enlightenment at the stage of security as ultimate, perfect, and free from all falsehood and defilement, like the empty sky, quote unquote. The Benevolent King's Sutra reads, quote, if one obtains the great wisdom of nirvana, one can penetrate the ultimate source of delusion and realize one's essential nature until nothing but the wonderful wisdom remains, end quote. Boy, that's a big one, right? That's exactly what I was just talking about. Like the cornfield analogy, right? In the Diamond Wisdom Sutra, it says, quote, when one reaches enlightenment, nothing but pure goodness will remain, end quote. Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha states in the Awakening of Resolute Mind and Conviction in the Mahayana, quote, only pure blessings exist within the matrix of the thus come one, end quote. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu remarks in his treatise on the consciousness-only doctrine, quote, when adamantine, a profound trance state penetrating the Amala consciousness, meditation is achieved, other remaining defilements and a lesser form of non-defilement would draw forth the ultimate consciousness of perfect clarity and total purity. Then, being no longer necessary, they will be abandoned forever. Now, what that statement is regarding is something you've heard me say a few times, is fusing with Gohonzon. So it's sitting down and chanting in front of Gohonzon is certainly important. And it is the practice. But as you study and as you learn things like this, adamantine meditation, a profound trance state penetrating the Amala consciousness, that is the state of your actual meditation. Your point of meditation is to, again, clear your mind's path from your human distractions to perceive your Buddha nature, the Buddha mind. And so the Gohonzon and chanting to it is your method, our method of fusing with that consciousness, of interacting with our Buddha nature. And it takes a while, but it just depends on how much time you spend with Gohonzon, how much chanting, and how fervent. Adamantine was the word used here. This is a firm resolve. This is a focused resolve. I will know my Buddha mind, but you actually want more immediacy to it than that. I am communicating with my Buddha mind. See, you need to divest yourself of the time component, because it's also an illusion that gets in the way. You just need, I want to realize my Buddha mind. I want to talk to you right now, to you being me, but your aspect of me that is clear. I want it right now. I am actualizing it now. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. That kind of resolve. It may make you giggle to chant the Gohonzon that way for a moment, because it seems so presumptive. But if you aren't learning anything from the teachings, it's not presumptive. It's presumptive for you not to. Okay. Continuing, this is still the question. A careful comparison of the Lotus Sutra and the sutras taught before it shows that those sutras are innumerable and that they have been taught over a long time. Therefore, although both are the Buddha's teachings, if these two contradict each other, you should accept the earlier sutras. Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha was the Buddha's 11th successor, whose appearance had been foretold by the Buddha himself. Vasubandhu was the author of 1,000 treatises and was numbered among the 4 ranks of Bodhisattva. How then can you believe the great teacher Tendai, a lowly priest living far away from the birthplace of Buddhism, who interpreted the sutras but did not write a single treatise? Still, I might be able to disregard the many and accept the few if the Lotus Sutra said anything to prove this point. But where in the sutra can you find any passages that definitely verify the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the 100 worlds, and 1,000 factors, and 3,000 realms in a single moment of life? In the Lotus Sutra, we find the following passage, quote, he, the Buddha, had rooted out evil from among the phenomena, end quote. Neither Bodhisattva Vasubandhu's treatise on the Lotus Sutra, nor Bodhisattva Saramati's treatise on the treasure vehicle of Buddhahood makes any mention of the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, nor are there any writings by the teachers of the northern and southern schools in China, or by the priests of the 7 temples of Japan, that expound this principle. It is simply Tendai's own biased view, and Dengyo made the mistake of transmitting it. That is what the teacher of the nation Qingyang meant when he said, quote, "This is an error of Tendai's." End quote. The Dharma teacher Hui Yuan said, quote, "By defending Hinayana doctrines as the Tripitaka teachings, Tendai has confused Hinayana and Mahayana, for both containing the Tripitaka, or 3 divisions of the canon." End quote. Ryoko criticized him, saying, quote, "Tendai is the only one who did not understand the true meaning of the Flower Garland Sutra." End quote. Tokuitsu reproached him, saying, quote, "See here, Chi-e, whose disciple are you? With a tongue less than 3 inches long, you slander the teachings that come from the Buddha's long, broad tongue that can cover even his face." End quote. The great teacher Kobo commented, quote, "The Buddhist teachers of China vied with one another to steal the gi of the Dharanis, or the true word, and claim that it is the possession of their own school." End quote. Thus, the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life is not mentioned in either the provisional or true teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. It did not appear in the writings of any of the 4 ranks of Indian scholars, and no Chinese or Japanese teacher has ever espoused it. How then can you dare to believe it? So you see, this question fundamentally is challenging the idea that Buddhahood is available to all of us. That the 3,000 realms is a clever invention of one lowly monk who knows what his agenda was. Maybe he is the outlier in this massive collection of other teachers who interpret the writings, the ancient writings, the sutras. Maybe they're right to just dismiss this insight altogether. So now comes the answer. Because this is going on in his lifetime all around him. It's coming from other sects, other teachers, and his own followers, his own students, because they're of that culture. They were born into it. So how can you tell them different? How can you assure them, and us by extension, that Buddhahood is really inherent, that it is within our grasp? Okay. And that, on the other hand, that this is actually the teaching of the Lotus. See, this is a fundamental argument, because this is where all these other teachers relegate the Lotus Sutra as an inferior teaching. They miss this point. They refuse to accept it. Although some sects, funnily enough, adopted this teaching, but of the 3,000 realms, but they perverted it in their own way, for their own sanctity, their own authoritarian control. Okay? Answer. Your criticisms are extremely harsh. So, first of all, back off. Okay? Nonetheless, the differences between the Lotus Sutra and the other sutras are clear from the text of the sutras themselves. So, yeah, good on you for the scholarship. There's a huge difference between all of the different sutras, from the start, throughout the middle, throughout the 4 that you mentioned. So, okay, I'll take you on. Valid question, in other words. In them, we find statements that the Buddha did not reveal the truth in the first 42 years of his teaching. You remember that part? And that he will reveal it in the Lotus Sutra. Drop the mic. Okay. Many treasures Buddha and the Buddhas of the 10 directions presented themselves to attest to the truth of the Lotus Sutra, something they did not do for any other sutra. With the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni enabled the people of the two vehicles to attain Buddhahood, whereas with earlier sutras, he did not. In the earlier sutras, he stated that he attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. But in the Lotus Sutra, he revealed that his enlightenment actually occurred in the remote past. In other words, he, the human, doesn't own Buddhahood. That's not how they're interpreting it, because they're adhering to earlier sutras. But Nichiren is pointing out that all of this is in the Lotus Sutra. This culminating teaching, standing on the shoulders of all previous teachings, doesn't deny them. I will now address the problems posed by the scholars you mentioned above, because Nichiren well knows where all of these questions are coming from, right? The great teacher Tendai comments, quote, Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna clearly perceived the truth in their hearts, but they did not teach it. He's not besmirching those bodhisattvas. What he's saying is that they experienced this Buddha nature for themselves. But in their time, in their culture, to broach that awakening would alienate more than it would inculcate people to listen to the teachings. They weren't ready for it. They weren't ready to know this like we are today. Instead, they employed the provisional Mahayana teachings, which were suited to the times. The Buddhist teachers who came later, however, were biased in their understanding, and the scholars obstinately clung to their own views, until, in the end, they began to battle with one another. Each defended one small corner of the teachings, and thereby completely departed from the sacred way of the Buddha. The great teacher Chang'an says of Tendai, quote, even the great scholars of India were not in a class with him, and the Chinese teachers, well, one need hardly mention them. Speaking of harsh, this is not Nichiren saying this, though. He's quoting just the same way as his questioners are. You're refusing to see these quotes, is what he's saying. This is no idle boast. The doctrine he taught was indeed of such excellence. He reordered and configured the canon of Buddhism. Tendai was no slouch, little monk living in the rocks. He was a very important scholarly figure who debated with the northern and southern schools of China, all of those people, and defeated them roundly. His understanding of the sutras and the Lotus specifically were unmatched. Okay? In their hearts, Vasubandhu, Nagarjuna, Ashvaghosha, Saramati, and other Buddhist scholars knew the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, but they did not reveal it to others because the time for it to be expounded had not yet come. As for the Buddhist teachers in China who preceded Tendai, some kept this treasure in their hearts and others knew nothing about it. Among those who came after him, some accepted this doctrine only after first trying to disprove it. Remember the debates. And others never accepted it at all. So obviously those were the people that were being quoted in the questions, right? In other words, still beliefs held by other sects. Concerning the passage in the Lotus Sutra that you quoted, quote, he, the Buddha, has rooted out evil among the phenomena, end quote. Here the Buddha is referring to a teaching from one of the earlier sutras. But when you take a closer look at the sutra, it is clear that the mutual possession of the 10 worlds is being explained. For in the same sutra, this passage is found, quote, "The Buddha's wish to open the door of Buddha wisdom to all living beings," end quote. So what is Buddha wisdom? Did we already discuss this? Buddha wisdom is the wisdom that we ourselves experience when we communicate to our Buddha nature. The wisdom comes from understanding the monkey mind, understanding the way that we instantiate our thoughts. Where do they come from? How do they form? The understanding, the wisdom is of the formations themselves, not the thoughts. The process of formation is what creates all our samsaric illusions. And so to have the depth of that wisdom, to know our own Buddha-ness, that is Buddha wisdom. It's not in some far-off place. It's in our actual practice. When we chant Hanzen, we are expanding our Buddha wisdom, our experience of this life process, so that we can know it more deeply, more clearly. That word keeps coming to mind. Clearly, clarification, awakening. These are all words trying to define a shift of experience, a shift of cognation of what it is to be what we experience in this life. So, of course, that can only happen if your Buddha nature is here with you. Tendai comments on this passage as follows, quote, "If people do not possess innate Buddha wisdom, how could the Buddha say he wanted to open it?" Thud. "One must understand that Buddha wisdom is inherent in all human beings," end quote. The great teacher Chang'an concludes, quote, "How could people open the door to and realize their Buddha wisdom if it did not exist within them? How could a person show the poor woman her treasure repository if the treasure repository did not exist?" End quote. It is, however, extremely difficult to convince you that Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, exists within us, just as the other 9 worlds do. Therefore, he gives us this admonishment beforehand. Quote, "Among the sutras I have preached, now preach, and will preach, the Lotus Sutra is the most difficult to believe and the most difficult to understand." The, quote, 6 difficult and 9 easy acts, end quote, that he expounds in the next chapter explains how difficult it is. Hence, the great teacher Tendai states, quote, "Because the theoretical and the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra contradict all earlier sutras, they are extremely difficult to believe and difficult to understand. No less difficult than facing an enemy who is armed with a spear," end quote. The great teacher Chang'an comments, quote, "The Buddha intended these as his ultimate teachings. How could they ever be easy to understand?" End quote. The great teacher Dengyo remarks, quote, "The Lotus Sutra is the most difficult to believe and to understand because in it the Buddha directly revealed what he had attained," end quote. In more than 1800 years after the Buddha's passing, only 3 persons throughout the 3 countries perceived this correct doctrine. They are Shakyamuni Buddha of India, the great teacher Tendai Chiche of China, and the great teacher Dengyo of Japan. These 3 men are all Buddhist sages. So how long have we got? All right, that was one question and one answer to that question. Next video, the next question. Um, I know I keep saying this, but I really, really, really do appreciate your guys' support, participation in these videos. Like I say, please comment, you know, uh, your comments, your questions, uh, even though at times they may seem at first to be challenges for me, always inspire me, uh, expand my perspectives, the way that I look at all of the things that the scholarship of my own efforts in my life, that they still come from within this thing called Sylvain. But when you ask me questions that either provide me, and this is on my end, your questions are your questions, but I might see them as something I need to dig deeper into for us. Uh, Things maybe that I've missed. Ooh, I need to talk about that more, which also helps me study and sometimes challenge me. Here we go with the battery again. Okay, I'm going to call it quits on this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you.